Sup YouTube, we are back again, and today we're just going to talk about some glide bait, some good old-fashioned swim bait content. So, I realized that there's like a couple different, like, I get questions all the time, like, how do you fish like a glide bait or whatever, and my answer always is, like, it depends on the bait. Like, you really have to know how the bait, like, reacts to your rod and whatnot to really be able to fish it at its peak performance. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, is the different types of baits that I got sitting here, and talk about those and what they do, and how they do it, and how I can trigger fish to react to them, even on small ponds, which I fish pretty frequently. Fish rivers with toothy critters in them. So that's I'm gonna talk about every single thing I know about glide baits thus far, and talk about draw power, talk about around cover, like literally everything. So this is gonna be a long one, but stick around. You guys might find something interesting about this. So here we go. Start talking about like your normal glide bait, like say the Depths 250 or the Arashi. These are probably some of my favorites. But they fish. Oh, I got this one tied on the rod real quick. The Arashi, probably some of my favorite glides, along with that Bait Sanity. These three all fish really similar. Same with that Negotiator. I'm gonna fish them the same because they don't really require. They glide really far on their own, that you don't really need to do any erratic things, which I'll talk about later in the video. But so these baits, they move like real nice and smooth, like roll side to side to side to side. Like they don't, like an eye slide. It doesn't glide really wide, kind of like this. But when if the angler can learn how to use this thing is an absolute beast. I mean, I haven't caught many fish on it just because I don't really throw it a lot, because you really need to learn it. But yeah, these baits, like how I'm gonna fish them is I'm gonna throw them around cover, like throw them up against weed lines, throw them up against trees, and I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna throw them past them so you don't spook the fish when it hits the water. But I'm gonna start tracking that bait nice and slow, and when I get to where that fish is sitting, I'm gonna give it a twitch, and it's gonna shoot toward the tree or the weed line, and then back real fast. And that fish will probably be watching that, and I'll see it come towards it, and it was like already getting fired up, and then the thing will shoot, and it'll just crush it. And I've had that happen so many times. In current around rocks, that works extremely well if you can really learn the current, and you can cast up current, and then. But I'm also going to talk about some smallmouth baits that I like really well. I picked up this Molex. It was a little bit small for what I like for largemouth. Like largemouth, I actually like a lot bigger profile. Like this is probably like my minimum. Like these two are my minimum. If I can get that untangled real quick. These two are my minimum. Like the Negotiator and the Arashi. You'll probably be like, oh, well, the Negotiator is like the similar size of like the Molex, and I say that's too small for me. They're both 7 inches long, but this thing is a lot heavier than this, and I don't know if you guys can tell, but that Roman mate actually looks a lot bigger. Like this tail is a lot, like if you're looking at it from the side, this really enhances the profile of the bait, and it just looks a lot bigger than that Molex. The Molex actually looks a lot more like a bait fish. This looks just like a really, like your generic fish shape, I guess. The Roman mate is a little bit thicker as well, which I really think enhances the profile of the bait. I don't know how well you guys can see that, but the Molex has some fins and whatnot, which they're neither here nor there. I don't really think they do much other than just enhance the profile. But this bait, it's probably the smallest largemouth bait I'll fish, and I don't really fish it that much just because I have so much luck with the Arashi, which they're really similar. The Arashi is probably based off the Negotiator. They have similar paint schemes and whatnot, but similar profile but different. Like the Arashi has a completely different joint in it, And the Arashi actually glides a little bit wider than the Negotiator, but fish are probably the same. Yeah, the Negotiator, like if I'm really hammering them with this and then the bite slows down, I'll go to this, because this thing actually falls. Like if you rig it stock, it'll fall a little bit slower. But yeah, and fall rate, that's something I'm really gonna get into later. But for now, I'm just talking about your generic glide bait, like your Depths 250, your Explorer, your Negotiator, your Arashi, like all that stuff, and even the little bait Sanity. I don't really fish this dude a lot, but it gets bit. It's a fantastic bait. It's also got a really slow sink rate. This is actually a faster sink just because I wanted to experiment with red this spring, so I just picked it up. I did catch a fish on this though. I'll talk about that later. But so the Depths 250 and your Explorer, like all that stuff, it's really like your generic glide bait. Like it moves on its own. You don't really have to impart a lot of rod twitches or reel twitches or anything like that, unless you feel like you have a follower, or you do have a follower and you just want to trigger that fish to strike. So, and now I'm going to talk about your big baits, your hinkle, if you guys are lucky enough to have a mother, or even like the upwards of that, like the 12-inch osprey, the giant triple trouts, your mother chaser, all that stuff. This is like the whole other category. This is like where I'm going to go out with one rod, one reel, 30-pound monofilament line, or maybe even 40, and I'm just gonna look for one bite. Or you're pre-fishing for a tournament and you want to draw as many fish in as possible. That's where this bait comes in. This is the biggest bait that I own thus far. It's a hinkle trout, 11 inches long, 9 ounces. Got like a trout, but I actually painted it like a shad because I don't really have any trout near me. Well, I do, but just some trout farms that just have small bass in them. But yeah, this bait, it imitates a shad really well, because even if you compare it to like a Depths 250, like I don't know if you guys can see this, but that profile, like the hinkle trout is like double the height of the Depths. I mean, it's got a gigantic, absolutely monstrous profile in the water. And that's where I feel like this type of bait is really going to excel. It's drawing fish in. It's really knowing like what size range is in your lake. Like I had multiple instances over the spring and summer where I was drawing in multiple 5 to 6 pounders on small ponds. Like if you really want to see, and I've also had schools of 10 to 12 to 1 to 2 pounders following it in. But this bait, it's really unique. I mean, like this is probably the most bang for your buck swim bait on the market. Like you can, if you get a hold of Andrew Hinkle, I'll leave his Instagram below where you can contact him. But like this thing has like a really like interesting swim, to say the least. Like your Depths 250, like it goes like this through the water and side to side, but it's also got a lot of forward movement too. This thing is crazy. I mean, this thing, it's got more side to side movement and then forward movement. Like it goes like this. Like you cast it out, it throws, and it swings like this, and then it swings the other way, and then it swings like this, and it swings the other way. It's really unique. And if a lot of people are throwing like your Depths 250, your Explorer, your Arashi, all that stuff, hit them with this thing. I mean, chances are they haven't seen this bait before, unless you're in San Diego or Los Angeles or any of those other California waters where you guys throw this a lot and they get them. This is probably one of the best glide baits on the market, in my opinion. Like the amount, like it's expensive, like for a $200 swim bait, but when you compare it to like mothers and chasers and all that stuff, it's really unbelievable the amount of stuff that this bait. You get swiveling hooks out of this thing, so the fish don't have any leverage throwing it. You get a really realistic profile. You get that mouth, the gills, like it's amazing the amount of detail that Andrew put into this bait. But yeah, this is probably one of my favorite glide baits of all time right here. But anyway, getting back to the point, this thing has a really unique action. Like, it swings left to right. I mean, there's like no other swim on the market that I've seen like that, where it comes more side to side than forward. And yeah, it really excels in draw power, because what draw power is, it's the amount of pulling power that a bait has. And what I mean by that is, if you go throw, let's say, a Waver 168 for example, you throw this up a creek, you'll have like 1 or 2 followers at the best, if they haven't really seen it. Chances are you're not really going to pull fish up. This is actually a smallmouth bait that I use, just because it's got good profile for them to get in their mouths, and it's really erratic. And a negotiator is going to have a lot more drawing power than the S-Waver 168 and the Arashi. Like, they're similar size, similar thickness, like the whole thing. The Bromade is just a little bit taller. But these baits are going to have a little bit more drawing power. You're probably going to pull, let's say, 2 to 4 followers. You'll probably get some big ones in the mix. It's good around cover, all that stuff. And then you go to the same creek and you throw a depth 250 in the middle of a creek. And you're probably going to get a whole school of fish like after this thing. You're going to get like probably 5 to 10 followers, maybe even more. I've seen 10 to 20 fish at one time following this thing. It's amazing, like, how curious they are. And how the only way I can explain it is how, like, the fish, like, I'm not saying I believe in any of this garbage, but if there was something like a UFO in the sky, like, that's all everyone does. They all go out to look at it. I think the bass do the same thing with these, just because it's so out of place. It's like, what the heck is that, you know? But these baits have a tremendous amount of pulling power. But I mean, this thing with the absolute gargantuan profile compared to even this thing, like, I mean, you can pull just about every single giant fish in that area with this thing. It's insane. And that's where guys will get really good, is they'll throw like 14, 15, 16, even 20-inch glide baits just to not even catch a fish, to use as locators. And they'll use that to really, like, pull fish out of areas, really see what that lake is capable of holding. But that's it for that. Now let's talk about, like, smallmouth baits. I live up north. I'm in the Midwest. There's a lot of smallmouth. There's also a lot of toothy critters where I live, like in a lot of the rivers that I fish for smallmouth. One of my favorite baits, I actually have a leader on this one, because there's some muskie in this lake in this river that I was fishing. But this is an S-Waver 168. These are probably some of my favorite smallmouth baits. These two, just because they have a good profile where the fish can, like, the smallmouth don't have as much bigger of a mouth, but they could still get this profile in their mouth. Not so much as like a Debs or like the Arashi. Like, they have a hard time getting this thing in their mouth. Like, they'll headshot it, they'll miss it, like, they'll just nip at it, they won't get the hook, they'll get hooked like outside, they'll bounce off of it. But this thing, I feel like these two, they can get in their mouth really a lot easier. So if you're going out, you're catching a bunch of 1 to 2 pound smallmouth, try throwing these. Like, these are a little bit bigger. You probably get you get less bites, but you definitely get more quality bites. And yeah, and now let's talk about color. So color, I think, really, like, a lot of people, like, just they spend too much time on color. Like, to me, swim baits, like, especially glide baits, it's more about how the bait moves in the water as opposed to, like, color. I mean, you can see, I was throwing a red bait this summer because I felt like I was pressuring them with my traditional, like, shad and trout color baits and bass. But so I threw this in, and I was able to get a few more bites just because they haven't really seen that. But okay, so there's color. Just, it depends on the water clarity. If the water's really stained, but I feel like you want at least like 2 to 3 foot of viz for a decent swim bait bite, or to expect to get bit on a swim bait. Of course, if there's current, like they'll hit a lot. Like if the lake doesn't usually have current in it, but you have a big rain and it gets clear, like something like this will work really well. But yeah, so that's pretty much on color. Just throw like whatever bait fish you have. If you have bluegill in your lake, just use a little bit darker bait. If you have shad, shiners, like a lot of that stuff, throw a lighter bait. I don't really pay too much attention to that. I catch plenty of fish on the colors that I have. So next thing I want to talk about is like, so you have your traditional like glide baits that just move on their own, like I discussed in the first part of this video. Talk about smallmouth baits. Next, let's talk about what I call the jerk baits of glide baits. But you guys might not understand what I mean by that, but when I say jerk baits, I mean these two baits right here. They perform best, in my opinion. Even the 168, they perform best when they're really, like, you put a lot of input into the rod. And I'm not saying that you can't fish this like a jerkbait, but it's more likely to spin around and clip the hook and reel in sideways like this, coming back, and it'll just be a waste of a cast. But these things, I mean, this bait in particular, I mean, if you fish this bait like a jerkbait, it's insane the things that this thing does. I mean, it'll... Like, on a straight retrieve, this thing will just kind of tilt through the water like that, not very far at all. And you're like, oh, the bait sucks or whatever. And you go to rip it, and this thing just, it's going like this, and it like shoots like 4 to 5 foot. It's insane. There's nothing else like it. So if you want to show them something different, this bait is a tremendous bait for that. Sorry about my dirty fingernails. I was just working on my bike earlier, but. Yeah, so there's that. There's this side. This thing works really well. It's got it's got a lot of forward movement, but it's also got a decent glide to it. So, but when you twitch it, it shoots off just like the Gancraft 230. I don't really have that bait, so I really can't tell you anything about it. But that's another bait that I've heard fishes a lot like this, but in more reasonable size. This thing weighs like 6.5 ounces. Like it's 6 ounces, I think. It's a big bait to throw, and it's a lot of effort to throw. But that 230 I've heard is a bait that fishes very similar to that. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about it. Like, pretty much my thought process when I'm throwing swim baits, what I use them for. I use them on the edge of weed lines a lot. Use them to, when I feel like I'm just catching a bunch of small fish and I want to try and get a bigger bite. That's what I use. So hope you guys enjoyed. My Instagram got hacked. Some scumbag decided to hack my Instagram, and oh, you're what are you doing? You're sitting there in India or whatever, trying to scam people. So, it got hacked. But my new one is in the description box below, as well as some of the baits and the rods and reels that I'll throw on these. I'll just link those in the description because it's already like a 20-minute video. But thank you guys for watching, and if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe and like for more good swim bait content. Thank you guys for watching so much.